least 2 bills sponsored by Senator Judy Seeberger have crossed the finish line or soon will. One that will phase out the non-essential use of PFAS, or forever chemicals, is expected to be included in an omnibus package. The second, to improve worker safety at refineries, is already law. She joins me now to talk about the legislation. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So you mentioned at a press conference that your personal well contains PFAS, and because of that, you use a water filtration system. A lawsuit by the state of Minnesota against 3M over groundwater contamination in the Southeast Metro, which is your district, resulted in an $850 million settlement. Do you view your district as a kind of canary in the coal mine when it comes to PFAS contamination and the possible impacts on human health?
Yeah, I absolutely do. We've seen the effects of PFAS in my district, which is on the east side of the metro. And early on, efforts were taken using that 3M money to remediate municipal wells and private wells within my district. We've seen it up in the northern part in Lake Elmo, down through Afton where I live, in Cottage Grove. And more recently now, with the lowering of the acceptable thresholds of PFAS, we now have Hastings within the community of areas that now is affected by PFAS. So we're seeing the acceptable thresholds get lower and lower and lower, and while that happens, more and more communities are being impacted by PFAS contamination. I think what we're seeing within my district, we're going to start seeing statewide as we discover additional areas of PFAS contamination and looking at the effects that it has on our residents.
There are an enormous number of products that contain PFAS chemicals: carpet, textiles, cosmetics, menstrual products, ski wax, and more. If this bill becomes law, what will manufacturers be required to disclose come January 1st, 2025?
Right, so the law has new labeling requirements. So if something contains PFAS, it's going to be reflected on the labeling. It's going to notify the consumer that this product contains PFAS. Of the products that you mentioned, those are within my bill to ban PFAS in those particular products. I think when folks think about PFAS, I always kind of defaulted to the Scotch Guard and the Teflon pans and things like that. But when you start thinking about our stain-resistant carpets, that's the PFAS technology. Dental floss, of all things, something that we use every single day, potentially introducing this substance into our bodies. So the labeling requirements, so as a consumer, you're going to know what you're getting, and then going further to ban PFAS in a lot of those consumer products.
So manufacturers will have the choice to make, to either just completely eliminate the use of the PFAS or to say it contains it in this product. Does it have to say how much it contains? Are there different kinds? How do we know the level of use of the product, of the chemical in the product?
Right. In my view, no level of PFAS is safe. I think what we're finding with the constantly lowering of the threshold, that we're discovering that really no level is safe. What I've learned is that these chemicals are bioaccumulating, which means they build up in your system over time. So even at minuscule levels, it never leaves your body. We saw the powerful testimony of Amara Strandy, which I think gives voice to the potential health effects that exposure to these chemicals can cause.
And we should say that Amara Strandy testified before multiple committees and then died before her 21st birthday of a cancer that she attributed to PFAS contamination.
Right, yeah. Her testimony was powerful, and it's really heartbreaking that she didn't live to see this law get across the finish line. I think again, no level of PFAS is safe within our bodies, and I think it's up to the consumers to make that choice, whether they want to use a product that has PFAS in it or not.
Well, and there is a distinction in the bill between essential and non-essential. I know that the chemical exists in firefighting foam. What is an essential use? What is a non-essential use?
Yeah. It's kind of industry specific with regard to whether it's considered essential use or non-essential use. There's some medical products that use it that there simply is no alternative. Let's say, for example, a stent for your heart, or some prosthetic uses. And since there is no alternative in some of these other uses that are essentially life-saving uses, there has been language included in the bill to exempt those products unless and until an alternative can be found. In the case of firefighting foam, it was really a couple of industries that argued the loudest that this was an essential use. And I don't necessarily agree that firefighting foam without PFAS is less effective or more dangerous than the type with the PFAS. There's certainly arguments to be made on each side. But I did have long conversations with the firefighting industry and firmly believe that PFAS, that firefighting foam without PFAS is just as effective as the dangerous stuff.
Minnesota will be leading the nation if this bill becomes law. Do you expect other states to follow our lead?
I do, and I would hope that they would. PFAS was invented here in Minnesota, and I think it's our duty to come up with a solution and come up with these laws that ban it in all areas. So I would hope that we are a leader and an example for the rest of the country when it comes to banning these products.
So now let's turn to the refinery bill. You were also Senate sponsor of now a new law that will require, or does require, over time, a certain level of training for workers who work in refineries. And I remember the floor session several years ago when your predecessor, Senator Carla Bigham, offered this as an amendment that passed and then was clawed back later. It took a little while to get this bill into law. How come?
Well, nothing much happened in the last few sessions. We saw gridlock and things grind to a halt. So even though my bill had bipartisan support, I think it passed the Senate with 39 votes, which included Republicans and Democrats alike. Just the nature of the prior sessions, nothing got done. So I'm proud to have this pass through as a standalone bill and finally make its way through so that our workers in oil refineries can be as safe as they possibly can.
The training requirement that this law has is phased in over time with a maximum of 60% then of contracted workers. They'll be required to meet training requirements by the year 2026. So considering that there is a workforce shortage, does this law possibly make it harder for refineries to find enough qualified employees?
I would argue that it does not. What we saw and the origins of this bill came from refinery workers. It came from workers at the Marathon Refinery seeing unqualified, underqualified workers come in from out of state, which really put all of their lives in jeopardy. I think that it's not worth the cost to bring in untrained, undertrained, unqualified workers in a facility like an oil refinery where so much can go wrong. In fact, we saw it earlier this year. The Marathon Refinery had a spill of molten asphalt. Somebody was working on a valve, didn't do something correctly, and it resulted in, I want to say it was 20,000 gallons of molten asphalt spilling. 2 workers injured that had to go to the hospital. That's not okay. And that's exactly what my bill, now law, is meant to address. To the extent that there's a workforce shortage, everybody's seeing a workforce shortage, but we have wonderful trades programs that can train people to do this work safely and at a minimum threshold of training, which is our apprenticeship level. But it's not just a union bill. Anybody can establish a registered apprenticeship program. So the refineries themselves can do it and really bring our safety training and our worker training to this gold standard, this minimum threshold of training. So I don't buy it that there's a worker shortage and this is going to aggravate this. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to raise the floor and make everyone safer in these refineries.
And does this then potentially make it better for workers too because they're more highly qualified and can earn a higher wage?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a win-win all the way around. You know, as an oil refinery, do you want to spend your time cleaning up spilled molten asphalt and dealing with accidents that happen because you have underqualified or unqualified workers? Or would you rather pay people what they're worth, have qualified workers in there, and have a plant that runs safely and effectively? So I think it's a win for everyone.
Senator Judy Seeberger, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.